A Roman senator could wear silk from a place he could not even find on a map. This was the strange reality of the ancient world, a planet stitched together by hidden threads. Long before satellites or the internet, sprawling road networks connected distant empires without those empires ever meeting face to face. By the end of this, you will understand the invisible architecture that secretly shaped our global history. How did silk cross a continent without a single merchant making the full journey? And what forgotten cultures thrived in the shadows between great powers? What does it mean for us that our ancestors were linked long before they knew each other's names? Think of it as a relay race across the entire planet. One runner passes a baton to the next, who carries it further, and so on, until an object has traveled a distance no single person could ever cover alone. This was the fundamental principle of the ancient world's greatest achievement, a system of indirect connectivity. The silk worn by that Roman senator was not delivered by a Chinese merchant who sailed to Italy. It moved hand to hand, culture to culture, across a vast and intricate human chain. When we say empires like Rome and Han China were connected without direct contact, this is precisely what we mean. They knew of each other, yes, they desperately wanted each other's goods, but they never signed a treaty, they never shared a border. No ambassador from one ever stood in the court of the other. The connection was entirely mediated. A whisper passed through a dozen different languages before it became a story. The real architects of this global web were the people in between. Nomadic herders on the steppes, merchants in oasis cities, sailors on monsoon winds. They were the indispensable links, the runners in the relay. They created a vibrant buffer zone, a middle world where goods, ideas, and technologies could mingle and transform long before they reached their final destination. This layered system meant that economies thousands of miles apart became subtly interdependent, while politics remained separate. It was a delicate, sophisticated dance of give and take, all happening in the spaces the history books often overlook. To understand the true genius of these ancient roads, you must first see them not as simple lines on a map, but as a living, breathing network of human relationships. That sprawling human chain needed a name, and history gave it one wrapped in the very fabric that made it famous. We call it the Silk Road, yet that single, tidy name is a beautiful illusion. There was never one road, one map, or one caravan that made the full journey. Instead, picture a colossal, shifting web. A web of overland trails snaking around mountain passes and across blistering deserts, intertwined with maritime routes following the monsoon winds across the Indian Ocean. This was not a highway built by an emperor's decree, but a living network carved by countless footsteps over centuries. Its true origins are found not in commerce, but in a desperate search for friends. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, a Han Dynasty explorer named Zhang was sent west on a diplomatic mission. His goal was to find allies against a common foe. He returned over a decade later, having failed in his original task, but he brought back something far more valuable: knowledge. He described the sophisticated kingdoms and cultures of Central Asia, their goods, their horses, their potential as trading partners. That report, more than any treaty, unlocked the imagination of an empire. It revealed that the world was far larger and richer than anyone in Chang'an had dreamed. The pathways he described became the arteries of an economic system. To travel these routes was to face the planet's most formidable geography. Caravans had to cross the Taklamakan Desert, a place whose very name whispers a warning, often translated as the place of no return. They scaled the dizzying heights of the Pamir Mountains, called the roof of the world. They navigated through the vast, organized realms of the Persian Empire. No single merchant, no matter how brave or wealthy, controlled a journey from end to end. This is the network's brilliant, practical heart, a bolt of silk from a Chinese workshop would be sold to a trader in a frontier town. That trader would carry it to an oasis market, selling it to a Sogdian merchant famous for their long-distance networks. The Sogdian would take it over the mountains, where it might be traded to a Parthian, then a Syrian, and finally a Roman. With each handoff, the price increased, the story of its journey grew, and its value became more mythical. By the time that silk draped the shoulders of a senator in Rome, it was more than a fabric, it was a legend from a half-imagined land. The senator had no concept of a Han Dynasty loom, just as the Chinese weaver had no image of the Roman Forum. They were connected by an invisible market, a chain of mutual desire so strong it bent the very shape of the world. The Silk Road stands as history's greatest lesson in connectivity without control. It proved that economies could become profoundly intertwined long before empires ever shook hands. But this story of connection is not unique to the Old World. On the opposite side of the globe, in a landscape of breathtaking verticality, another empire solved the puzzle of distance with stone and sheer human ingenuity. High in the Andes Mountains, the Inca built a road system that defies belief, the Qhapaq Ñan, or Royal Road. This was not a single path but a colossal web of engineered trails spanning over 40,000 kilometers, an expanse that could nearly circle the entire Earth. It connected a territory stretching from modern Colombia down through Chile, binding together mountains, deserts, and jungles into a single, manageable realm. The sheer ambition of it is staggering. The Inca accomplished this without two technologies we often consider fundamental to such a feat, the wheel and a system of written language. Instead, they read the land itself as their blueprint and built a network that worked in harmony with the Andes, not against it. The Qhapaq Ñan was the empire's central nervous system. Along its stone-paved routes, armies could march to secure distant provinces, but more remarkably, a state-run messenger service of relay runners, the Chasquis, could carry a quipu, a knotted cord record, from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of days. Imagine a message about a harvest or a potential unrest traveling from the highlands to the capital of Cusco faster than a horse could have carried it. This was an information superhighway built for an empire that needed to see and respond to everything in real time. The road also enabled a brilliant economic system. The Inca state used it to redistribute goods across radically different ecological zones. Food, textiles, and ceremonial items from the coast, the highlands, and the jungle were moved along these routes to support communities and state projects. While the Inca Empire itself was a unified political force, the Qhapaq Ñan did something profound. It wove together regions and cultures that had lived for centuries in relative isolation. It created, for the first time, a direct and indirect web of exchange across some of the planet's most extreme topography. The engineering itself is a silent marvel that still puzzles researchers today. The stonework is so precise, fitting together without mortar, that it has withstood centuries of earthquakes that would topple modern construction. They built stairways up sheer cliffs, tunnels through solid rock, and suspension bridges woven from grass fiber that swayed over roaring rivers. This network was not laid upon the land, it was crafted into the very bones of the mountains. It represents a fundamentally different philosophy of connection, one of absolute integration and control, yet it achieved a similar end, binding distant peoples into a shared system. Where the Silk Road was a decentralized, organic market, the Qhapaq Ñan was a masterpiece of centralized design. Both, however, stand as monumental answers to the same human challenge. How do you make a vast, fragmented world feel whole? The true power of any network lies not in its endpoints, but in its vital centers. For all the grandeur of Rome and Han China, for all the reach of the Inca emperor in Cusco, these long-distance systems would have collapsed without the specialized cultures that thrived in the spaces between. These were the master connectors, the indispensable middlemen who turned impossible distances into manageable segments. They built their entire identities and fortunes on the simple, profound act of bridging worlds. Among the most legendary of these were the Sogdians, a people from the fertile valleys of Central Asia, in what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. They were not a vast empire with a massive army, but a confederation of merchant city-states, and they possessed a far more valuable currency, linguistic agility, and cultural fluency. A Sogdian merchant was a translator in the deepest sense. He would speak not only his own tongue but likely Persian, some Chinese, and the languages of the steppe nomads. This allowed him to navigate the complex social customs and business practices of vastly different civilizations. He knew what a Chinese official expected in a gift, how to bargain with a Persian caravan master, and what stories would make Roman aristocrats desire a new spice. They were the original global business consultants, and their home city of Samarkand became a dazzling cosmopolitan hub, a place where the indirect contact between empires crystallized into direct, vibrant fusion. You could hear Buddhist chants, Zoroastrian prayers, and see Christian symbols all within a few city blocks, but the Sogdians did far more than move silk and spices. They were conduits for faith and ideas. It was largely through Sogdian merchants and monks that Buddhism traveled from India, along those Central Asian trade routes, and into the heart of China. They also carried Nestorian Christianity, a branch of the faith, deep into the East. They didn't just transport these religions, they often adopted and adapted them, creating unique artistic blends that they then passed on. Their success reveals a fundamental truth about ancient connectivity. The greatest influence was often held not by the giant at the end of the chain, but by the agile link in the middle. They controlled the flow, and with it, they amassed wealth and cultural capital that made their cities glittering oases of power. A similar, though less known, dynamic existed in the Andes. The Inca road system, the Qhapaq Ñan, also relied on specialized intermediary groups. Consider the Lupoka people who lived around Lake Titicaca. They were master herders of the precious alpaca, controlling vast flocks and producing the finest wool textiles in the empire. The Inca state did not simply conquer them and take their goods. Instead, they integrated the Lupoka into their economic network, using the royal road to transport Lupoka textiles as a form of tribute and state currency. The Lupoka, in turn, gained privileged status and access to goods from other regions. They became a crucial economic node, a specialized producer whose wealth was amplified by their connection to the imperial system. Like the Sogdians, they thrived by mastering a niche within a larger network, by being the best at something everyone else needed. These intermediary cultures teach us that connection is a profession. It requires skill, trust, and deep cultural intelligence. They filled the silence between empires with a bustling conversation of their own, and in doing so, they shaped the religious, artistic, and economic landscape of continents. Their legacy is a reminder that history is not only written by the conquerors on the throne, but also by the translators in the marketplace. A third great artery of ancient connection was forged not through mountains or across oceans, but over a seemingly endless sea of sand. The Sahara Desert presented the ultimate paradox, a barren void that became one of history's most active corridors. From around the 8th century of the Common Era, this formidable emptiness was tamed by the camel and mastered by the nomadic Berber and Tuareg peoples. They transformed the world's largest hot desert into a highway, creating the trans-Saharan trade routes, a network of indirect connection every bit as sophisticated as those in Eurasia or the Andes. The economics were brutally simple and profoundly powerful. In the lush forests of West Africa, empires like Ghana and later Mali mined gold in abundance. To the north, across the blistering dunes, the Mediterranean world craved that gold but had almost no salt. a mineral essential for preserving food and sustaining life. In the Sahara itself, vast, dried-up ancient seabeds held immense deposits of salt, so a magnificent, desperate exchange was born. Caravans of thousands of camels, known as the salt caravans or azalai, would form. They would load slabs of precious salt in the northern mines like Tagheza, a place so desolate it was said to be built entirely of salt blocks. Then, for months, they would march south, guided by the stars and the deep knowledge of Tuareg navigators, facing sandstorms, thirst, and extreme heat. Upon reaching the southern termini like Timbuktu or Gao, they would trade their salt for its weight in gold. The return journey north saw the camels now laden with gold, ivory, spices, and sometimes individuals caught in the conflicts of the era, moving northward. This was a trade built on mutual necessity across a barrier of mutual ignorance. A merchant in Cairo or Marrakesh might handle a gold coin, but he had no true map to the land of its origin. He knew only the legend of a fabulously wealthy king in a distant land. Similarly, the Mansa or emperor of Mali might read an Arabic manuscript on astronomy or law, but he had never seen the Mediterranean coast where such ideas were further debated. The connection was entirely filtered through the Saharan intermediaries, the Berber and Tuareg tribes who controlled the wells, the routes, and the logistics of survival. Their mastery of the desert made them the indispensable, powerful middlemen, the sole bridge between two flourishing worlds, and at the southern edge of that bridge, a city of legend rose from the sands. Timbuktu began as a seasonal camp for Tuareg nomads, but its position at the crucial meeting point of the desert and the Niger River floodplain made it the perfect terminal. It grew astronomically wealthy as the final marketplace where gold from the south and salt from the north were exchanged. But Timbuktu's true legacy was not just commerce, it was intellect. Fueled by its trade wealth, it became a breathtaking center of Islamic scholarship and learning in the 15th and 16th centuries. Its libraries held tens of thousands of manuscripts on law, medicine, astronomy, and poetry. Scholars from across Africa and the Arab world traveled there to study. This flourishing of knowledge, this beacon in what outsiders saw as a remote wilderness, was the direct product of indirect trade. The gold that built its universities and attracted its teachers traveled a path no single civilization controlled. Timbuktu stands as a monument to what happens when worlds connect through a challenging middle space, not in spite of the barrier, but because of it. The desert did not separate cultures, it demanded the specialized connectors who could weave them together. This bolt of silk begins its life in a quiet workshop in eastern China, its threads shimmering under the careful hands of a weaver. To her, it is a product of skill, a source of local pride, perhaps a means to support her family. She has no concept of a city called Rome, no image of the marble forums where her creation will one day be admired. Her world is the loom, the local market, the rhythms of her province. She sells the finished bolt to a traveling merchant, who loads it onto a cart with ceramics and lacquerware, beginning the first leg of an unimaginable journey. The destination is a frontier town called Dunhuang, a bustling gateway where the cultivated fields of China give way to the vast, intimidating silence of the Taklamakan Desert. Here, at the very edge of the known world, the silk changes hands for the first time. The Chinese merchant sells it to a frontier trader, a specialist who deals with the caravans forming to head west. With this transaction, the silk officially leaves its homeland. It becomes a trade good, its identity beginning to blur. The next custodian is a Sogdian merchant, encountered in the oasis city of Kashgar. This is where the relay truly begins. The Sogdian, a linguistic and cultural maestro, examines the silk not just for its quality, but for its potential. He calculates the risks of the mountain passes ahead, the tolls to be paid, the desires of the markets in Persia. He purchases the bolt, and it is folded into his own much larger caravan of goods. For months, it travels over the Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world, bundled against the cold and dust. The Sogdian does not plan to take it to its final destination. His goal is the great trading hub of Merv. There, in the crowded bazaars of the Parthian Empire, he finds his buyer, a Parthian trader, expert in the tastes of the Mediterranean world, sees the silk and envisions the premium a Roman aristocrat will pay. He buys it, and the value of the bolt increases once more, its price now reflecting the perils of the mountains and the deserts now behind it. The Parthian's network stretches westward. He transports the silk across the Iranian plateau to another legendary crossroads, the caravan city of Palmyra. Here, in an architectural marvel of columns and temples rising from the Syrian desert, the final intermediary enters the chain. A Syrian merchant, well connected to the seaports of the eastern Mediterranean, acquires the silk. He is the last link. He arranges for its final voyage, perhaps by ship from Antioch to the port of Ostia, the bustling harbor of Rome. When the silk is finally unloaded on Italian soil, it is purchased by a Roman wholesaler, then a luxury dealer, and finally, it is presented to a senator or a wealthy patrician. The journey, which took years and crossed a continent, is complete. Consider the profound disconnect this chain creates. The Roman buyer admires the fabric's incredible lightness and sheen. He might have heard vague tales of the seers, the silk people, who harvest the thread from trees in a distant, mythical land. He has no true understanding of silkworms, of mulberry groves, or of the Han dynasty's sophisticated state workshops. The value he pays is not for the labor of the weaver, but for the story of the journey itself, for the risk, the distance, the sheer miracle of its arrival. The weaver, meanwhile, knows only that her work was valuable enough for a merchant to buy. She might hear stories of Western kingdoms, but they are just as fantastical to her as her homeland is to the Roman. They are linked by commerce, yet separated by a chasm of complete cultural anonymity. This is the ancient commodity chain, a precursor to our own global supply networks. Value was added not through manufacturing, but through transportation, through the bravery to cross a place of no return, the skill to negotiate in a dozen languages, the knowledge of where to find water in a sea of sand. Each handoff was a leap of faith, each middleman a crucial insulator against the chaos of the unknown. The system did not require empires to be friends, or even to fully understand each other. It only required a mutual desire and a line of courageous people willing to bridge the impossible gap in between. The final product on the shelf, whether in Rome or Persepolis, was never just an object. It was a condensed epic, a physical record of trust and endurance passed from one stranger to the next, all the way across the world. Far to the north, under the cold, gray skies of the Baltic Sea, another ancient desire was quietly shaping history. While caravans crossed the Sahara and silk moved toward Rome, a different kind of treasure was traveling south from the pine forests and wind-swept coasts of prehistoric Europe. This was the Amber Road, a network less famous but no less significant, built on the allure of a single, beautiful substance. For millennia, storm surges along the Baltic shoreline would wash up lumps of fossilized tree resin, warmed by the sun to a golden glow. To the local peoples, this amber was a piece of captured sunlight, a material with both practical and spiritual power. They began to trade it inland, and in doing so, they ignited a chain reaction of exchange that would eventually stretch all the way to the palaces of the Mediterranean. The Amber Road was not a single paved highway, but a fluid web of river routes, forest trails, and coastal passages. It moved south from the Baltic coast, down the Vistula and Oder river valleys, across the plains of Central Europe, and over the Alpine passes. At every stage, the amber changed hands. Germanic tribes who collected it might trade it to Celtic intermediaries further south. These Celtic groups, master metalworkers and traders in their own right, would transport it toward the emerging civilizations of the south. Eventually, the prized lumps would reach the Etruscans in Italy, a culture that adored amber for intricate jewelry and burial ornaments. Finally, with the rise of Rome, the demand became insatiable. Roman nobility called it the gold of the north, valuing it for its beauty and its supposed protective, even medicinal, qualities. A Roman patrician might wear an amber amulet, believing it warded off illness, yet he would have had no accurate geographical concept of the misty, forested shores where it originated. The map in his mind would have been a blank space labeled simply, "the lands of the Amber people." This profound disconnect was the network's defining feature. The entire system was powered by intermediaries who controlled the flow of information as tightly as the flow of goods. The Germanic and Celtic tribes in the middle were not just carriers, they were gatekeepers. They could exaggerate the dangers of the northern wilderness, inflate the rarity of the amber, and craft the myths that increased its value in the south. They became wealthy and powerful precisely because they maintained that zone of mystery. But amber was never the only thing moving on these routes. It was the flagship commodity that opened the pathway for everything else. Following the amber south came other northern treasures, rich furs from pine martens and beavers, valuable metals like tin and honey. Tragically, these economic currents also carried a darker trade, as individuals captured in conflicts were often moved along these same routes toward the slave markets of the classical world. This network, therefore, created a complex and often difficult link between the literate, urban world of the Mediterranean and the oral, clan-based societies of the north. It was a slow, centuries-long dialogue conducted through objects. A bronze Roman cauldron might end up in a chieftain's grave in Denmark, a status symbol from a distant empire. Celtic artistic styles, influenced by Mediterranean motifs they saw on traded goods, would ripple back northward. The Amber Road proves that you do not need a grand imperial design to create a lasting network. All you need is a concentrated desire for something specific, something beautiful and unreachable, and the human determination to bridge that gap. It shows us that even the edges of the known world were never truly isolated. They were always connected by strands of golden, fossilized sunlight, passed from hand to hand until they reached the heart of civilization. A bolt of silk might be admired for its beauty, but a new idea could quietly reshape an entire civilization. These ancient roads were, above all else, an information superhighway, carrying the most transformative cargo of all, beliefs and knowledge. The movement of faith along these routes is perhaps the most profound example. Buddhism originated in India, but its journey to becoming a cornerstone of East Asian culture was made possible by the Silk Road. It did not travel as a finished, sealed doctrine. Instead, it moved with monks and merchants, stopping at every oasis and caravanserai. In the cosmopolitan hubs of Central Asia, it encountered Zoroastrianism, local spirit cults, and Greek artistic traditions brought by Alexander the Great's legacy. As it absorbed these influences, Buddhism transformed. The serene, human-like Buddha of Indian art gradually took on the flowing scarves and divine halos of Persian deities in places like Gandhara. Local guardian spirits were incorporated as protective bodhisattvas. By the time Buddhist teachings and art filtered into China, they were already a syncretic blend, a fusion that made this foreign faith feel strangely familiar and adaptable to a new cultural landscape. This was not conversion by conquest, but adoption through gradual, peer-to-peer exposure. A Chinese traveler might first encounter Buddhism not from a missionary, but by seeing a strange, peaceful statue in a Sogdian merchant's house or hearing a chant in a bustling market town. The faith spread through curiosity and cultural exchange, not imperial decree. The same routes carried revolutionary technologies in the opposite direction. The invention of paper in China around the 2nd century before the Common Era was a quiet breakthrough that would eventually echo across the world. For centuries, the Chinese guarded the secret closely, using paper for government records, art, and money. But secrets are hard to keep on a busy trade route. The knowledge of papermaking began its westward journey, likely carried by skilled artisans who were captured during a border conflict and brought to Samarkand. By the 8th century, paper mills were operating in the Islamic world, in cities like Baghdad. This was a monumental shift. Paper, far cheaper and more versatile than parchment or papyrus, fueled an explosion of Islamic scholarship, bureaucracy, and literary culture. Libraries grew vast, and the work of translating and preserving Greek and Roman texts expanded dramatically. Centuries later, this technology would enter Europe through Islamic Spain, laying a material foundation for the Renaissance and the printing press. The journey of paper is a perfect metaphor for indirect diffusion. The original inventors had no intention of gifting this to the world, but the network itself ensured it could not be contained. Beyond faith and technology, the subtlest exchanges were often the most enduring. A decorative pattern on a piece of Persian textile might inspire a Chinese ceramic design. A story from an Indian epic told around a caravan campfire could find its way into the folklore of Central Asia. Architectural techniques for building domes or constructing caravanserais spread from one region to the next, adapted to local materials and climates. Astronomical charts and medical knowledge were copied, translated, and improved upon at each stop. This constant, slow-motion exchange meant that no culture at the heart of these networks existed in a vacuum. They were all, to some degree, remixes. An idea could arrive completely divorced from its original context. A mathematical concept used for temple architecture in one land might be applied to irrigation in another. The genius of these ancient information highways was their lack of central control. There was no publisher, no official translator, no academic standard. Transmission was messy, organic, and profoundly human. It meant that the map of human thought was being redrawn not in palaces or universities first, but in the dusty markets and roadside inns where the world's strangers met and talked. While caravans moved across continents, an even wider web was being woven upon the waves. The Indian Ocean became the stage for history's most enduring maritime network, a system powered not by kings or empires, but by the rhythm of the sky itself. For thousands of years, sailors from Arabia, India, Persia, and East Africa mastered the monsoon winds, a celestial clockwork that dictated the pace of ocean travel. From roughly October to April, the winds blew steadily from the northeast, carrying ships from India and the Arabian Peninsula toward the coast of Africa. Then from April to September, they reversed, blowing from the southwest to carry those same ships back home. This predictable, annual pulse turned the Indian Ocean from a terrifying barrier into a reliable aquatic highway. It allowed for seasonal voyages of astonishing distance, creating a world where a merchant in Roman Egypt could sprinkle pepper from a land he could not place on any map. The heart of this desire lay in a tiny, volcanic archipelago far to the east, the Moluccas, known to history as the Spice Islands. Here, in the humid air, grew trees that produced cloves, nutmeg, and mace, spices so rare and coveted they were worth their weight in gold. But like the silk from China or the amber from the Baltic, these spices embarked on a long, fragmented journey long before they ever saw a European port. The chain began with local Indonesian traders who would bring the harvested spices to major entrepôts like Srivijaya in Sumatra. There, Indian merchants, whose large vessels were built to withstand the open ocean, would purchase the cargo. They would sail west across the Bay of Bengal, using the monsoon to reach ports on India's Malabar coast, such as Muziris. In these bustling harbors, the spices changed hands again, now to Arab or Persian seafarers whose dhows, with their iconic triangular sails, were perfectly designed for the next leg. These sailors would ride the monsoon winds across the Arabian Sea to ports in the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea. At destinations like Aden or Suraf, the spices were unloaded and sold to overland caravan traders. They would then travel by camel to the Mediterranean coast, where finally Venetian or Genoese merchants would buy them for distribution across Europe. At every point, the value multiplied and the origin story grew more mythical. A Roman gourmet savoring a dish with pepper had no concept of a tropical island chain in Southeast Asia. He might believe the spice grew in a mythical land guarded by giant birds or poisonous snakes, tales often spread by the intermediaries to protect their profits and mystify the source. This maritime network created a uniquely cosmopolitan culture in the port cities that dotted its shores. From the Swahili stone towns of East Africa like Kilwa and Zanzibar to the emporiums of Gujarat in India, these were places where religions, languages, and customs blended seamlessly. A Persian coin could be found in a Sri Lankan market, Chinese ceramics graced a Swahili palace, and Arabic nautical charts incorporated knowledge from Javanese pilots. It was a world connected by the shared language of commerce and the shared rhythm of the winds, a floating community of exchange that operated independently of the empire's inland. This oceanic web demonstrates that the most resilient networks are often those built on natural patterns, not political borders. It thrived for millennia precisely because no single power could ever dominate the entire chain, from the Spice Islands to the Mediterranean dinner table. The sailor from Oman, the trader from Gujarat, and the merchant from Alexandria, they were all indispensable links in a relay race across the water, proving that the desire for flavor could connect the world just as powerfully as the desire for gold or silk. The relentless rhythm of the monsoon winds carried spices across oceans, yet high in the Andes, a different kind of speed was being engineered, one that moved at the pace of a human heartbeat. While the empires of the Old World relied on merchants and caravans to carry news slowly along with goods, the Inca faced a more urgent problem. How do you govern a vertical empire, a realm of jagged peaks and deep valleys spanning thousands of kilometers, without your commands dissolving into rumor by the time they reach the farthest province? Their answer was not a network of trade, but a network of pure information, and it was powered by the most reliable technology of all, the human body. This was the Chasqui system, a state-run relay of messengers that turned their monumental road, the Qhapaq Ñan, into a living nervous system. Imagine a young man, selected for his speed and endurance, standing at a small, stone-built way station called a tambo. He is not a soldier or a merchant. His sole purpose is to wait, listen, and run. These tambos were spaced at intervals of about 1 day's run for a typical traveler, but for a Chasqui, this distance was a sprint. When a runner from the previous post came into view, the waiting Chasqui would step forward, receive the message, and immediately launch himself down the stone-paved path toward the next tambo. The message itself could take 2 forms. Often, it was carried in the runner's memory, a precisely memorized oral report. But for complex or official data, it was encoded in a quipu, a set of knotted cords where the position, type, and sequence of knots recorded numerical and narrative information. The Chasqui did not interpret the quipu, he simply carried it, a physical data packet handed from one node to the next. The efficiency of this system was breathtaking. By maintaining a constant relay with fresh runners always poised to go, messages could travel up to 240 kilometers in a single day. A report about a border disturbance or a harvest yield in what is now Ecuador could reach the central government in Cusco in a matter of days, not months. This meant the Sapa Inca, the emperor, could make decisions based on information that was almost current, a revolutionary advantage in the ancient world. Provincial governors could be instructed, armies could be redirected, and resources could be redistributed with a speed that rivaled any contemporary system on the planet. It was governance in real time, achieved without a single horse, wheel, or written word. This was a physical, human-powered internet. Each Chasqui runner was like a data packet, moving from one local server, the Tambo, to the next. The quipu was the file format, a tangible, portable record. The road itself was the hardwired cable. The system allowed for astonishing indirect control. A government official in Cusco never had to personally travel to a distant mountain outpost to deliver an order or assess a situation. He could send his authority racing down the lines of the Qhapaq Ñan, trusting the flawless, standardized training of the Chasqui to maintain the integrity of the message from origin to destination. It enabled the Inca to project power and cohesion across a geography that was inherently fracturing, turning a collection of conquered valleys into a unified, responsive state. The Chasqui system represents perhaps the purest form of ancient indirect connection, one devoted entirely to the flow of knowledge. Where the Silk Road moved ideas accidentally, bundled with commerce, the Inca built a dedicated channel for command and intelligence. It showcases a fundamental truth about these networks. They were always shaped by the landscape they had to conquer. In the flat expanse of the steppe, connection meant caravans. On the open ocean, it meant ships riding the monsoons. In the fractured, vertical world of the Andes, it meant a chain of elite runners, passing whispers and knots along stone roads, binding an empire together with the sound of their footfalls and the rhythm of their breath. While the Inca built stone highways and sailors charted the monsoon winds, another kind of network was forming across the world's widest open space. This was the Eurasian steppe, a seemingly endless sea of grass stretching from the edge of Europe all the way to the borders of China. Here, there were no paved roads, no way stations, no official maps. The infrastructure was the land itself, a horizontal corridor of rolling plains that functioned as a natural superhighway for those who knew how to ride it. This was the domain of the nomadic confederations, cultures like the Scythians, the Qian, and later the Mongols. They did not build cities, but they built something perhaps more powerful, a fluid, mobile system of connection that operated on a continental scale. Their entire way of life was engineered for movement, living in portable felt tents and mastering the horse. This mobility made them the ultimate intermediaries, the essential link between the great sedentary empires that ringed the steppe's edges. To the south lay the walled cities and farmlands of China, Persia, and the Byzantine Empire. These settled civilizations produced the grain, silk, metals, and luxury goods the nomads desired but did not produce themselves. The nomads, in turn, controlled the horses, the grazing lands, and most importantly, the geographic space that separated these southern powers from one another. They became the brokers of the northern Silk Road routes, the caravans that dared to travel above the deserts and mountains. A merchant's journey from Samarkand to Chang'an was not possible without the permission, or at least the tolerance, of the steppe confederations who controlled the passes and the watering holes. This relationship was a constant, tense dance of trade and conflict. In one season, a nomadic leader might be negotiating favorable terms for his people to guide and protect a caravan, taking a share of the goods as payment. In another, if diplomacy failed or tribute was deemed insufficient, the same group might launch a swift raid on a border town or hold a caravan hostage. For the empires on the periphery, the steppe was both a bridge and a threat, a source of magnificent horses for their cavalry and a terrifying, unpredictable force that could appear at their gates without warning. The famous Great Wall of China is the ultimate monument to this dual reality, a colossal barrier built not just to keep people out, but to manage the flow of contact, to force interaction through specific, controlled gates where trade could be taxed and monitored. The steppe network highlights a profound truth about ancient connectivity. The environment itself could be the conduit. Where forests or mountains might isolate, the open grasslands connected. A rider on a fast horse could cover astonishing distances with no need for engineering, following river valleys and ancient migratory paths. This allowed for the rapid transmission of not just goods, but styles and technologies. Stunning Scythian goldwork, discovered in burial mounds from Ukraine to Siberia, shows artistic influences from Greece, Persia, and China, a blend that could only happen through constant, indirect exchange across the grassland highway. The steppe was a cultural melting pot on horseback, where a decorative motif could travel thousands of miles in a generation, passed from tribe to tribe long before any diplomat made the journey. This environmental network reached its zenith under the Mongols in the 13th century. By uniting the steppe under a single authority, they temporarily pacified the entire corridor, famously creating the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. For a few generations, the tension between trade and raid was suspended. The Silk Road routes north and south became safer than they had ever been. A merchant could, in theory, travel from the Black Sea to Beijing under the protection of the Great Khan's law. This explosion of safe passage supercharged the exchange of everything, from textiles and spices to diplomats and diseases. It demonstrated the latent potential of the steppe when its unifying power was harnessed, proving that this horizontal sea of grass was not a barrier between worlds, but the very thread that stitched them together. The legacy of the steppe routes reminds us that connection is not always about what humans build, but about what they learn to navigate. It was a network defined by adaptability, by reading the landscape like a map, and by understanding that sometimes the most powerful position is not at the end of the road, but in the vast, open space in the middle. These magnificent roads carried more than treasure and ideas. They also transmitted a hidden, devastating passenger, one that would reshape history from the shadows. The very connectivity that enriched civilizations also created the world's first pandemic highways, proving that a network designed for exchange could not filter what it carried. In the 6th century of the Common Era, a sickness emerged along the trade routes of Central Asia. It was a strain of bacteria, Yersinia pestis, living in fleas that infested rodents like the hardy black rat. These rats were constant, unwitting stowaways in the grain sacks and food supplies of merchant caravans and ships. As goods moved from the steppes toward the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, the bacteria moved with them, a microscopic traveler on a journey of its own. The result was the Plague of Justinian, named for the Byzantine emperor who ruled from Constantinople as the outbreak ravaged his city. It spread with terrifying speed along the established maritime and overland routes from Egypt to Europe, killing a staggering portion of the population. Centuries later, in the 1400s, the same bacterium found its perfect conditions again. This time, the Mongol peace had made the Silk Road safer and busier than ever, creating an uninterrupted biological corridor from East Asia to the Black Sea. From there, Geno's merchant ships carried the infection to Sicily, and it exploded across Europe as the Black Death. The disease moved faster than any army, ambassador, or rumor. A village could be healthy one month and devastated the next, with no understanding of the invisible chain that had delivered its fate. The tragedy was absolute, a loss of life on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. Yet within this profound hardship, we see the ultimate, unintended proof of how deeply these networks had intertwined the world. Societies that had never met in war were now linked in a shared biological destiny. The fall of empires and the reshaping of continents were not always the result of direct conflict or deliberate policy. Sometimes they were the consequence of a flea on a rat in a grain cart, traveling a relay system built for silk. This dark facet of connection forces a sobering realization. The ancient world had achieved a level of biological globalization centuries before it achieved a political one. The same relay of trust that passed a bolt of fabric from hand to hand could also pass a pathogen, with no one in the chain aware of the danger they carried. It demonstrates that once a pathway is open, it carries everything, the glorious and the catastrophic, the chosen and the stowaway. The legacy of these pandemics is written not just in the historical records of loss, but in the profound societal shifts that followed. Labor shortages changed economic structures, religious beliefs were challenged, and art turned to themes of mortality. The world that emerged from these crises was different, scarred but forced to adapt, a testament to the fact that our ancestors' greatest creation, global connection, was always a double-edged sword. The same currents that carried microscopic tragedy also carried sunlight on water, connecting a continent no one in Rome or Chang'an knew existed. While caravans snaked across Asia and runners sprinted along Andean roads, another kind of highway flowed quietly through the heart of North America. This was the Mississippi River Network, a vast, liquid web of exchange that proves long-distance connection is a profound human instinct, not an old-world invention. For over 1,000 years before European contact, the Mississippi and its countless tributaries served as the continent's central nervous system, moving people, ideas, and treasures across staggering distances. The geography itself dictated the rules. From the icy waters of Lake Superior, you could paddle south, carried by the current, through a branching maze of rivers all the way to the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. This was not a road built by engineers, but a pathway gifted by the glaciers, a ready-made highway that required only a dugout canoe and the knowledge to navigate it. What traveled on this water road tells a story of sophisticated, indirect trade. From the north came extraordinary raw materials. Great Lakes tribes quarried pure, malleable copper, hammering it into ceremonial breastplates, headdresses, and tools. This copper, with its distinctive reddish glow, became a coveted item of spiritual and political power. From the sunny south, Gulf Coast communities harvested enormous conch shells from the ocean. These shells were carefully cut and polished into decorative gorgets, cups, and beads that gleamed with a pearlescent white. And from the earth itself came chert and flint, high-quality stone for crafting lethal, beautiful spear points and blades. These objects did not travel with a single merchant in a single journey. Instead, they moved in a slow, ceremonial relay from community to community, often passed along as gifts during seasonal gatherings or as part of marriage alliances between leading families. At the center of this flourishing exchange, between roughly 200 before the Common Era and 500 after, were the Hopewell culture. They were not a centralized empire, but a shared set of religious ideas and artistic practices that linked dozens of independent communities across the Midwest. The Hopewell interaction sphere, as archaeologists call it, was fueled by this riverine trade. In their elaborate burial mounds, we find the evidence of a continent-wide network. A single Hopewell tomb in Ohio might contain copper from the north, shark teeth and shells from the Gulf, mica from the Appalachians, and obsidian from the distant Rocky Mountains. These materials were transformed locally into a stunning, unified artistic style, featuring intricate geometric patterns and animal motifs etched into pottery and embossed on copper. The movement of these objects meant the movement of ideas, a ceremonial practice or a symbol of power conceived in one river valley could, within a few generations, appear 1,000 miles away, adapted to local beliefs but still recognizable. This network peaked centuries later with the rise of the Mississippian culture and its great metropolis, Cahokia. Located near modern-day St. Louis, where the Missouri, Illinois, and Mississippi rivers meet, Cahokia was a masterful hub. At its height around the year 1000, it was larger than London at the time, a city of mounds, plazas, and perhaps 20,000 people. Cahokia's influence radiated out along the waterways. Its signature artistic styles, like the depiction of a mythical being known as the Birdman, and its religious concepts surrounding cosmic order and agriculture, spread up and down the river systems. Smaller chiefdoms from Oklahoma to Alabama emulated Cahokia's symbols of authority, building their own mound centers and participating in the same broad exchange of prestige goods. Yet crucially, this was not a Mississippian empire. There was no emperor in Cahokia sending governors to rule distant tributaries. The connection was again indirect, maintained through shared ideology and the economic pull of a magnificent capital. A chief on the Tennessee River might wear a Cahokia-style cape of feathers and shell beads to legitimize his own local power, asserting his place within a prestigious, far-reaching spiritual network. The Mississippi River system reveals that the drive to connect, to acquire the exotic, and to share symbolic language is a global phenomenon. It flourished without wheels, without writing, and without the beast of burden. It was built on canoes, reciprocity, and a shared reverence for the waterways that tied a continent together. Here, the highway was not paved with stone, but with flowing water, and its legacy is buried not in desert sands, but in the quiet, grass-covered mounds that still line the banks of the great river. A Roman coin rests in the humid soil of Vietnam. A piece of Chinese silk is carefully folded into the burial of a Celtic leader in southern Germany. A bead of Baltic amber lies in the tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh, far from its northern home. These objects are more than treasures, they are evidence. They are silent witnesses to journeys that written history never recorded, proving that the ancient world was connected in ways the great chronicles of empires failed to see. So how do we know these sprawling networks truly existed, especially when so many of the cultures in between left no written records of their own? The answer lies in the patient, meticulous work of archaeological detectives, who pieced together the ghostly outlines of these highways from the fragments left behind. The empires at the ends of the chains, like Rome and Han China, kept meticulous records, but their perspective was limited. They wrote about the exotic goods they received and the vague, mythical lands they came from. They documented their own caravans and edicts, but the vital middle of the journey, the relay handoffs across deserts and steppes, often happened in a space they did not control and could not document. This is where archaeology steps in, reading the story not from scrolls but from the soil. Every artifact found far from its birthplace is a data point on a vast, invisible map. That Roman coin in Vietnam did not get there because a legionnaire dropped it. It arrived through a long, complex chain of trade and gift exchange, passing through countless hands, its value shifting from currency to curiosity to a rare token of a distant world. Its very presence whispers of a connection, but archaeologists today go far beyond simply noting an object's origin. They use sophisticated scientific tools to ask deeper questions. Take a simple clay pot found in a market town along the Silk Road. Through a technique called isotopic analysis, scientists can examine the chemical signature of the clay itself and match it to a specific river valley or mountain range, pinpointing exactly where the pot was made. They can analyze the residue inside to discover if it once held wine from the Mediterranean or fermented mare's milk from the steppes. Suddenly, that pot tells a story of diet, commerce, and cultural mixing. Similarly, the source of metals in a dagger or a decorative figurine can be traced to specific mines, charting the flow of raw materials across continents. The distribution patterns of artifacts become the clearest map of all. When a specific style of carved bead, a unique pottery design, or a method of weaving appears in sites hundreds of miles apart, it creates a trail of breadcrumbs. These are not coincidences. They mark the flow of ideas, the movement of artisans, or the trade in fashionable goods. By plotting these finds on a map, archaeologists can see the routes emerge, like connecting dots to reveal a hidden picture. A certain type of glass bead made in India appears in Southeast Asian ports, then in East African coastal towns, vividly charting the course of the Indian Ocean monsoon trade. The reconstruction is a colossal puzzle where the pieces are scattered across the globe. A shard of pottery here, a coin there, the layout of a caravanserai in the desert, the remains of specific foods in ancient garbage pits. Each clue is cross-referenced, dated, and analyzed. Slowly, the shadowy network gains substance. We begin to see not just the fact of connection, but its rhythm and scale. We learn that trade was not a constant flood, but pulsed with the seasons, political stability, and technological advances. This detective work corrects the historical record. It elevates the forgotten middlemen, the Sogdian merchants, the Mississippian canoe traders, the Saharan guides, from footnotes to central players. It proves that the world our ancestors inhabited was, in its own way, as globally linked as ours is today. The highways were not made of asphalt, but of trust and desire, and their evidence is buried everywhere, waiting to tell its story. The story of ancient connection is incomplete without the sea. While empires rose and fell on land, a different kind of power was being built on the waves of the Mediterranean by a people who left no grand monuments, but whose influence is written in the very alphabet you are using to read this. The Phoenicians, based in the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon, were not conquerors seeking territory, but master navigators driven by commerce. They looked at the endless blue horizon not as a barrier, but as a highway, and they became its first true cartographers, stitching together the entire Mediterranean basin into a single, thriving economic zone long before Rome was even a village. Their genius was in creating not an empire of land, but a network of nodes, a constellation of coastal trading posts and colonies that stretched from the Levant all the way to the Atlantic coast of Spain and North Africa. Places like Carthage in modern Tunisia began as a simple Phoenician way station and grew into a power that would challenge Rome itself. These colonies were not about imposing culture. They were strategic ports, safe harbors where their distinctive ships, powered by both oar and sail, could resupply, trade, and gather intelligence. The Phoenician ship was a floating warehouse and a fortress designed for long voyages and heavy cargo. They were the indispensable middlemen between the ancient, established civilizations of the East, like Egypt and Mesopotamia, and the resource-rich, less developed cultures of the Western Mediterranean. Imagine a world where the tin needed to make bronze, the essential metal of the era, came from the mysterious, fog-shrouded islands of Britain. The Phoenicians made this link possible. They would sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar, braving the open Atlantic to reach the tin sources in Cornwall. They would trade manufactured goods, wine, and olive oil with the local communities, load their ships with the precious metal, and bring it back east. To the Bronze Age kings and pharaohs, this tin seemed to arrive as if by magic, sourced from a land of myth. The Phoenicians guarded these routes and sources with fierce secrecy, deliberately spreading terrifying tales of sea monsters and impassable oceans to deter competitors. Their most legendary product, however, came not from a mine but from a humble sea snail. Tyrian purple dye was a marvel of ancient chemistry and patience. It took thousands of crushed murex snails to produce a single gram of the vibrant, color-fast dye. The process was slow, foul-smelling, and extraordinarily expensive. But the result was a color that did not fade. A brilliant purple that became the ultimate symbol of royalty, priesthood, and extreme wealth across the ancient world. From the robes of Assyrian kings to the borders of Roman senatorial togas, this color screamed status, and its source was a closely held Phoenician monopoly. This control over a desired, irreplaceable resource epitomized their intermediary power. They connected worlds indirectly by controlling the flow of both the practical and the luxurious. A Greek nobleman might wear a purple-dipped tunic, having no idea of the meticulous snail-based industry behind it. An Iberian chieftain might wield a bronze sword, unaware of the long sea journey its tin core had taken. The Phoenicians thrived in the gaps of knowledge, the spaces between cultures. Their greatest and most enduring legacy, however, was not a product but a tool for thought. Sometime around the second millennium before the Common Era, they streamlined the complex writing systems of the region into something revolutionary, an alphabet based primarily on consonants. This script was efficient, learnable, and perfectly suited for recording transactions and keeping logs. As their ships traveled, so did their writing system. The Greeks adapted it, adding vowels, and from there it spread, evolving into the Latin alphabet used by much of the world today. Every letter you read is a descendant of a Phoenician merchant's note. They connected the ancient world not just with goods, but with the very means to record information, proving that the most powerful cargo a ship can carry is an idea. Sugar, orange, silk. We say these words without a second thought, unaware we are speaking the ghostly echoes of ancient marketplaces. The most durable legacy of these old roads is not buried in the sand or locked in a museum. It lives in our mouths, in the very structure of our speech. Language itself was a commodity on the move, and loanwords are its most persistent artifacts, cultural souvenirs picked up along the trail and carried home. They are linguistic fossils, each one a tiny map of a forgotten journey. Take that simple word, sugar. It begins in ancient India with the Sanskrit word shakara, meaning gravel or grit. As the knowledge of crystallizing sugarcane juice traveled westward with Persian and Arab traders, the word traveled with it. It became sukkar in Arabic, then entered medieval Latin as sakaram. By the time it reached English as sugar, it had crossed continents and cultures, its path mirroring the very sugar road that brought the sweet crystal from Indian fields to European tables. The word carries the entire history of that transfer within its syllables. The story of orange is even more vivid, a journey painted in the color of the fruit itself. Its origin is the Sanskrit naranga. Persian traders transformed it to narang, and Arabic speakers to naranj. When the fruit finally reached southern Europe, likely through the Moors in Spain, the initial N drifted away, blending with the article un in Old French to become orange. So when you say orange, you are unconsciously tracing its passage from South Asian orchards, through Persian gardens and Andalusian courtyards, before it arrived in the rest of Europe. The word is the journey preserved in sound. Place names themselves are powerful anchors of this history. Samarkand is not just a dot on a map, it is a Sogdian name that has echoed for over 2 millennia. It means stone fort or rock town, a fitting title for that mighty oasis citadel that stood as a crossroads of the world. To say Samarkand is to invoke the entire Sogdian civilization, their caravans, their multilingual markets, their role as the masterful middlemen of Eurasia. The name is a monument more enduring than any crumbling wall. This linguistic blending happened slowly, organically, through countless face-to-face transactions. A trader would need the local word for a spice to ask for it. A sailor would adopt the foreign term for a monsoon wind to navigate by it. Words for numbers, weights, measures, and greetings flowed along with the goods, creating pidgins and trade languages that were the essential glue of commerce. Over generations, the most useful of these foreign terms would settle into a language, losing their exotic flavor and becoming native. Every time we use these words, we are participating in the final, silent handoff of an ancient trade. We complete a transaction that began centuries ago, speaking the proof that our world was woven together long before we knew it was round. The connections were not just economic or epidemiological, they were grammatical. They shaped how we describe reality itself, leaving us with a vocabulary that is, at its heart, a collective inheritance from every shore and desert the caravans ever crossed. Far from the Mediterranean and the Andes, a different kind of crossroads thrived in the humid river valleys of Southeast Asia. Between the 6th and 11th centuries, a constellation of city-states known collectively as Dvaravati rose across what is now central Thailand. These were not the domains of a single conquering king, but a network of independent Mon-speaking principalities, bound together not by a shared army, but by a shared faith. Their true power lay in their position. To their west lay the Bay of Bengal and the Indianized maritime kingdoms. To their east rose the formidable Khmer Empire, and to their north the gravitational pull of China grew stronger. The Dvaravati realms sat squarely in the middle, transforming their territory into a vital terrestrial corridor, a land-based channel for one of history's most profound cultural transmissions, the journey of Theravada Buddhism from its roots in Sri Lanka and India into the heart of mainland Southeast Asia. This was a network defined by peaceful propagation. While other routes moved armies and spices, the Dvaravati corridor specialized in moving ideas, specifically the teachings of the Buddha as preserved in the Pali language. Monks and pilgrims traveled these inland routes carrying scriptures and sacred art. The Dvaravati cities, places like Nakhon Pathom and Yu Thong, became not just market towns but spiritual hubs. They built distinctive, massive stupas, dome-shaped monuments housing relics, and crafted beautiful stone sculptures of the Buddha in a unique, serene style marked by gentle smiles and flowing robes. This artistic signature became a visual language of faith, recognizable across the region. A merchant traveling from a Paiyu city-state in present-day Myanmar toward the growing Khmer center of Angkor would pass through this Buddhist landscape, encountering the same symbols and hearing the same chants in monastery after monastery. The shared ideology created a zone of trust and mutual understanding, a common cultural ground that made commerce and dialogue possible between very different political powers. The economic lifeblood of this network was its role as a connector between major powers. Goods from the Maritime Silk Road, coming from India and Sri Lanka, would move overland through Dvaravati territories to reach the interior Khmer and the communities further north. In return, products from the mainland interior would flow back toward the coast, but the most valuable commodity was the doctrine itself. The Dvaravati kingdoms acted as cultural filters and translators. They absorbed Buddhist concepts and artistic forms from their Indian sources, blended them with local traditions and beliefs, and then passed this synthesized version onward to their neighbors. This indirect transmission was crucial. It meant that when Theravada Buddhism reached the Khmer or other cultures, it arrived not as a foreign imposition, but as a refined system already adapted to the Southeast Asian context, delivered by peer civilizations rather than distant foreigners. The legacy of the Dvaravati network is a powerful reminder that connection does not always require political unity. These independent city-states found cohesion in a shared vision of the universe, using that spiritual framework to facilitate trade and cultural exchange across a broad geographic zone. They created a stable, inland alternative to the maritime routes, ensuring that the flow of ideas could continue even when seas were rough or ports were contested. Their story shows how a map of faith can quietly overlay a map of trade, guiding not just the movement of goods, but the very shape of a continent's identity, all through the quiet, persistent footsteps of monks and the enduring stone smiles of their Buddhas. A Roman coin in Vietnam tells one story, but the tales told around a campfire tell another. As surely as silk and spices traveled those ancient roads, so did stories, and with each retelling across 1,000 miles, they transformed. Facts blurred into legend, and distant lands became canvases for the imagination. When direct knowledge was absent, myth rushed in to fill the void, creating powerful, enduring fantasies that would one day steer the course of history. Medieval Europe, for instance, was captivated for centuries by the legend of Prester John. He was said to be a magnificent Christian king, a priest and a monarch, ruling a lost kingdom of immense wealth and virtue somewhere in the mysterious East. This was no random fiction. Scholars believe it likely sprang from garbled travelers' accounts of real communities that European merchants had heard about but never seen. Perhaps it was the Nestorian Christian churches thriving in Central Asian cities along the Silk Road, their faith preserved in isolation. Or maybe it was whispers of the powerful Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, a realm that seemed to confirm the dream of a righteous ally beyond the Islamic world. The legend took these fragments of truth and wove them into a perfect fantasy, a beacon of hope and a target for ambition. On the other side of the world, a similar mirror was held up. Chinese scholars and officials of the Han and later dynasties wrote of a distant Western empire they called Qian. Their descriptions are fascinating. They portrayed it not as a bizarre foreign land, but almost as a mirror image of their own civilization. They wrote that Qian was well governed, with walled cities, grand buildings, and a people who were honest and valued righteousness. They even described its ruler as having counselors chosen for their virtue, not their birth. This was less a factual report and more a projection. Unable to visit Rome directly, Chinese intellectuals imagined a civilization that reflected their own highest ideals, a philosophical counterpart at the other end of the world. These myths served a crucial psychological purpose. They made the vast, unknowable world feel smaller and more comprehensible. They turned frightening gaps in the map into places of wonder and potential alliance. But these stories were far more than just entertainment. They became engines of history. The persistent dream of finding Prester John's kingdom and the desperate desire to bypass the intermediaries who controlled the spice trade were powerful motivators in the minds of European explorers centuries later. When Prince Henry the Navigator sent ships down the African coast, or when Columbus sailed west, they were partly chasing phantoms born on the ancient Silk Road. They were seeking the source of the cinnamon and pepper, and the mythical Christian king who might help them confront their rivals. The ancient networks of indirect contact did more than move goods. They planted powerful seeds in the human imagination. The vague, glorious tales passed from caravan to caravan eventually fueled the ships that would shrink the world forever, proving that a story, once set loose on a road, can travel much farther than any spice, and its consequences can echo for 1,000 years. The desire for warmth in a desert palace could reshape a frozen forest a continent away, while the Dvaravati monks moved ideas of spiritual enlightenment. A far more tangible commodity was flowing south from the endless northern woodlands of medieval Europe, stitching together a world of startling contrast. From the 9th to the 13th centuries, a sprawling, ruthless network emerged, one built not on silk or spice, but on the luxurious pelts of animals that thrived in the cold. This was the Eurasian fur trade, a medieval economic engine that linked the shadowy pine forests of Scandinavia and Russia with the sun-drenched marble courts of Byzantium and the glittering capital of the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate, Baghdad. The geography dictated the routes. A web of mighty rivers, the Volga, the Dnieper, the Don, flowed south from the northern forests to the warm waters of the Black and Caspian Seas. These waterways became liquid highways, and the masters of this aquatic road were the Viking traders known as the Rus. They were not just raiders of monasteries, they were sophisticated, long-distance merchants. In their sleek longships, designed for both open sea and river travel, they pushed deep into the interior of what would become Russia. Their cargo holds were filled with the most valuable products of the north, bundles of exquisite furs from sable, ermine, and Arctic fox, along with amber from the Baltic coast and wax from forest bees. They established fortified trading posts at key points along the rivers, places like Novgorod and Kiev, which grew into powerful city-states precisely because of their control over this flow of wealth. The journey was perilous, requiring portages around rapids and negotiations with often hostile local tribes, but the destination justified the risk. To the south lay the immense wealth of the civilized world. When the Rus traders reached the markets of the Black Sea, they connected with the Byzantine Empire. In Constantinople, the demand for luxury furs was insatiable among the aristocracy and the imperial court. The pure white winter coat of an ermine, for instance, was not just warm, it was a blazing symbol of purity and status, used to trim the robes of emperors and patriarchs. Further east, down the Volga to the Caspian Sea, the Rus reached the trading centers of the Islamic world. Here, they exchanged their northern goods for something that became the very lifeblood of their economy, Islamic silver coins called dirhams. Thousands upon thousands of these coins have been found in hoards across Scandinavia and the Baltic, a silent testament to the scale of this trade. The dirhams were not just money, they were raw material, melted down to create the stunning silver jewelry that adorned the Norse elite. This created a perfect, if indirect, economic circuit. Consumer desire in the lavish courts of Baghdad and Constantinople created a powerful pull. That demand generated silver, which flowed north into the hands of the Rus chieftains. That silver financed more expeditions, more consolidation of power, and more extraction of furs from the hinterlands. The need for furs drove the Rus to explore, settle, and exert control over vast tracts of forest, fundamentally shaping the political landscape of Eastern Europe. They established tribute systems with the indigenous Finno-Ugric and Slavic tribes, demanding payments in furs, thereby drawing remote forest communities into a global economic web they would never see. A trapper in the depths of the Russian taiga, setting snares for sable, was now linked to the caliph in Baghdad. He would never meet a Muslim merchant, never see a Byzantine mosaic, but his livelihood was now indirectly tied to their fashion and their treasury. This network demonstrates with brutal clarity how luxury demand in one empire could act as a remote economic engine, driving exploration, settlement, and even state formation thousands of miles away. The silver dirhams buried in a Swedish field are the direct echo of a desire for ermine trim in a palace on the Golden Horn, connected by the daring voyages of traders on the river roads between worlds. The cold fur trader on the Volga and the desert merchant guiding his camels were solving the same puzzle. Scattered across continents and centuries, these networks were not random inventions, but shared responses to a universal human challenge. When we step back, the parallels are startling, revealing a common blueprint for connection that emerged independently across the globe. Each system began with a profound mastery of a specific environment. The Saharan traders did not simply cross a desert, they learned to read its star-filled night sky and locate hidden wells, turning a void into a corridor. The Polynesian navigators did not just sail an ocean, they memorized the patterns of swells, the flight paths of birds, and the position of specific stars, treating the Pacific as a charted highway. The Inca engineers did not conquer the Andes, they conversed with them, fitting stone roads into the mountain's own contours. Environmental mastery was the non-negotiable first step, the specialized knowledge that made the impossible journey merely difficult. Where these mastered pathways met, something magical and consistent happened, the birth of hybrid cultures. The oasis cities of the Silk Road, the port towns of the Indian Ocean, the river confluences of the Mississippi network, these were not just markets. They were fusion kitchens of culture, language, and faith. In these intermediary zones, a Sogdian could be a Buddhist who honored Zoroastrian fire rituals and used Greek artistic motifs in his home. A Swahili city on the African coast blended Bantu architecture with Arabic script and Indian trade goods into a completely new coastal identity. These were the world's first global villages, places where identity became fluid and adaptive, forged not by imperial decree but by daily interaction in the marketplace. The economic engine driving every network was also remarkably similar, a powerful pull of complementary desires. It was rarely a simple exchange of basics. It was the magnetism of the exotic and the essential. The Mediterranean world craved West African gold but had salt. The African kingdoms had abundant gold but needed that very salt for survival. China produced exquisite silk but desired the powerful horses bred on the Central Asian steppes. The steppe nomads needed grain, textiles, and metals from settled civilizations. This was not trade for subsistence, it was trade for transformation, where what was common in one land became priceless in another, creating an irresistible economic gravity that pulled goods across unimaginable distances. And every traveler on every one of these roads faced a nearly identical set of adversaries. Banditry was a constant shadow, whether from pirates on the monsoon seas or raiders in a mountain pass. The climate itself was a relentless foe, with the silence of the desert, the fury of an ocean storm, or the thin air of a high mountain pass. But perhaps the most persistent challenge was the intangible one, building trust. A transaction between strangers who shared no language, no God, and no law required a leap of faith. Systems of credit, standardized weights, and the reputations of entire trading communities evolved to meet this need. The very existence of these networks is a testament to a fragile, widespread human agreement to cooperate for mutual gain, even in the absence of any overarching authority. This leads to the final, fascinating paradox these systems all shared. They were both connectors and barriers. They wove the world together, yet they also carefully maintained a degree of separation. The intermediaries, whether Sogdian merchants or Tuareg guides, often had a vested interest in preserving the mystery of the lands beyond them. They might spread tales of monsters guarding spice groves or dangers in distant forests, not merely to entertain, but to protect their profitable role as the essential link. The roads brought silk to Rome, but they did not bring a clear map of China. They delivered pepper to Europe, but not an understanding of the Moluccas. This controlled separation is what kept the goods magical and the profits high. The network itself became a filter, allowing certain things to pass while obscuring the full picture. This universal pattern, emerging from the Sahara to the Andes, from the steppes to the seas, speaks to something deep within us. It reveals a fundamental human drive to reach beyond our horizon, to seek the exotic, to exchange, and yet to always preserve a little of the mystery that makes the quest worthwhile. That senator's silk and our smartphone share the same invisible blueprint. The components in your pocket, mined from one continent, refined on another, and assembled across a third, travel a journey just as fragmented and mysterious as any ancient caravan route. Our modern global supply chain is not an invention of the internet age. It is the direct, high-speed descendant of those dusty Silk Road relays. We have simply swapped camels for container ships and quipu knots for digital tracking numbers, but the fundamental architecture of indirect connection remains unchanged. The core principle is identical. Value is added through movement and transformation across vast distances, orchestrated by a chain of specialized intermediaries. The consumer who buys a finished product today, whether it is a garment or a gadget, is often just as disconnected from its origins as a Roman patrician was from a Chinese weaver. We know the brand, but not the hands that assembled it, the source of its raw materials, or the complex web of logistics that brought it to a shelf. This modern anonymity is the legacy of a 5,000-year-old system perfected on the backs of Bactrian camels. Even our most advanced logistics mirror ancient ingenuity. The concept of just-in-time delivery, where parts arrive precisely when needed on a factory floor, finds an eerie precursor in the Inca Chasqui system. Those relay runners were delivering critical information with a speed and precision that kept a vertical empire running in sync, a form of just-in-time governance. Today, satellite data and algorithms perform the same function, ensuring a component manufactured in Malaysia arrives at a German factory not a day early or late, minimizing cost and maximizing efficiency. The goal is identical: to collapse time and distance through flawless coordination, and the places where these chains converge still become crucibles of cultural fusion. Ancient Samarkand, with its blend of faiths and languages, has its modern counterpart in global hubs like Dubai, Singapore, or Rotterdam. These are the contemporary caravanserais where cargo is transferred, deals are brokered in a Babel of tongues, and temporary communities of sailors, pilots, and traders create a transient hybrid culture. They are the vital nodes where the indirect network becomes momentarily visible before the goods vanish again into the stream of global transit. Recognizing these parallels does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It reframes our current moment. We are not living through a sudden, unprecedented age of globalization. We are participating in the latest, fastest iteration of a very old human story. The stresses we see in these systems, from delays at ports to debates over labor and sustainability, are ancient tensions amplified by scale and speed. They are the modern echoes of a Saharan guide demanding a higher toll, or a steppe confederation disrupting a trade route. Understanding that our world was built by these ancient, indirect pathways grants us a crucial perspective. It reminds us that resilience has always depended not on a single point of control, but on the adaptability of the entire chain, on the trust between its many links. The next time you hold a device that is a compact atlas of the world, consider that you are completing a transaction that began when the first merchant decided to carry a beautiful stone to a neighbor, who carried it to another and another across a world they believed was flat. These roads of stone and memory now stand at a quiet crossroads of their own. The very routes that defied empires and time are facing new, relentless challenges in the modern world. Across the windswept plains of Central Asia, sections of the Silk Road are slowly being reclaimed by the desert or fragmented by new highways and pipelines. In the high Andes, centuries-old stonework on the Qhapaq Ñan is destabilized by increasingly erratic rainfall and melting permafrost, a direct consequence of a changing climate. And along the ancient incense route in the Arabian desert, the fragile remains of caravanserais and way stations can be lost to unchecked development or simply fade away from neglect. These are not merely old paths, they are the physical library of our global story, and their pages are crumbling. Recognizing this irreplaceable value, organizations like UNESCO have designated many of these networks as World Heritage Sites. This formal protection is a vital shield, but the work of preservation is a daily, ground-level struggle. It is a complex puzzle that involves far more than roping off an old trail. Archaeologists and conservators must use both traditional techniques and modern technology, like three-dimensional scanning, to document every stone before it shifts. But the most crucial element is not technical, it is human. Lasting preservation only works when the local communities who live alongside these ancient roads are active partners in their care. For the descendants of the Inca, the Qhapaq Ñan is not a relic, it is a part of their living landscape, a path their ancestors walked. When preservation projects involve these communities, training local stewards and linking the site to cultural identity and sustainable tourism, the road gains a future, not just a past. The goal is not to freeze these places in time, but to find a delicate balance. How do you protect a 2,000-year-old stone pavement while allowing a nearby village to build a necessary water line? How do you manage visitors who come to witness the majesty of a desert fortress without their footsteps eroding its very foundations? These questions require collaboration between international experts, national governments, and local leaders, all striving for a shared vision. The work is a testament to a profound shift in how we see these sites. We are no longer just uncovering lost cities, we are learning to listen to the landscapes themselves. Each preserved caravanserai, each stabilized bridge, is a tangible anchor point in the vast, invisible web of our shared history. They are open-air classrooms where the lessons of endurance, innovation, and connection are written in stone and sand. To walk a preserved section of the Silk Road in Uzbekistan, or to trace the line of the Qhapaq Ñan across a Peruvian mountain pass, is to engage in a direct conversation with antiquity. You are not just looking at an old road, you are standing on the very surface that felt the tread of countless footsteps, the weight of countless hopes. This physical connection matters. It transforms abstract stories of long-distance trade into a sensory experience, a visceral understanding of the distances crossed and the barriers overcome. Protecting these routes is an act of global memory. It is a promise to future generations that they, too, will be able to touch the stones that connected the world, and in doing so, understand the deep, ancient roots of their own interconnected lives. The map of the ancient world is still missing pieces. For all we have uncovered about these sprawling networks, profound mysteries linger in the silence between the artifacts, questions that keep archaeologists awake at night and remind us that our understanding is a sketch, not a finished portrait. Some of these mysteries are geographic, daring us to look beyond the known routes. We have firm evidence of Phoenician voyages to Britain for tin and down the African coast, but how far did they truly sail? Controversial, fringe theories suggest they may have crossed the Atlantic, pointing to potential linguistic echoes or stylistic similarities in artifacts as possible, though highly disputed, evidence. Mainstream scholarship remains deeply skeptical, demanding far more concrete proof, but the question itself highlights the tantalizing possibility of connections we have not yet dreamed of. Similarly, are we certain we have found every branch of the Amber Road? Could trails now buried under European forests reveal a more direct path from the Baltic to the Adriatic? And in North America, did the Mississippi network have a western spur, linking the great river to the obsidian sources of the Rockies through a chain of intermediary tribes we have yet to identify? These are not just academic puzzles. Each undiscovered route would rewrite the story of a continent's interaction, revealing a world even more intimately connected than we thought. Other mysteries are not of geography but of language and lived experience. We know the Inca Chasquis carried quipus, those intricate knotted cords, but the precise code remains largely undeciphered. We understand they recorded numbers, perhaps even narratives, but how exactly did a runner interpret a specific knot pattern to relay a message about a distant harvest or a troop movement? The system died with the empire, taking its full grammar with it. Every quipu in a museum is a locked archive, a book whose pages we cannot yet read. Even more elusive are the human stories behind the goods. We can trace a bolt of silk from Chang'an to Rome, but we cannot hear the voice of the Sogdian merchant who bartered for it in a Kashgar market. What private hopes drove him onto the treacherous Pamir passes? What did he fear in the emptiness of the desert night? The diary of a Saharan salt trader, the ledger of a Mississippian canoe master, the song of a Polynesian navigator. These intimate records of motivation and emotion are almost entirely lost. History remembers the systems, but the individual heartbeats within them have faded to silence. These gaps, however, are not dead ends. They are the very engine of discovery. Every unanswered question is a compass pointing toward a potential find. A farmer's plow striking an unfamiliar coin, satellite imagery revealing a straight line across a desert that shouldn't be there, a new technique for analyzing residue in a clay pot. Any of these can suddenly illuminate a lost pathway. The story of ancient connectivity is not a closed book gathering dust on a shelf. It is a living manuscript, and we are still writing it. With each season of excavation, each breakthrough in scientific analysis, we add another sentence, another paragraph. We find the missing link that turns a speculative dotted line on a map into a solid, stone-paved reality. These ongoing searches remind us that the past is not a foreign country we have fully mapped. It is a landscape still half in shadow, waiting for the next beam of light to reveal another hidden thread in the immense, beautiful tapestry of our shared human journey. These ancient roads offer more than just history. They hold a mirror to our own networked world, reflecting timeless lessons about how societies truly connect and endure. Their first and perhaps most powerful lesson is resilience. These were not rigid, state-controlled monopolies. When a mighty empire like Rome or the Han dynasty fragmented, the trade routes did not simply vanish. Instead, the network adapted. Caravans found new paths, intermediaries shifted their alliances, and local markets continued to operate. The desire for exchange proved more durable than any single political border. This reveals a profound truth that grassroots economic and cultural connections can outlive the governments that initially sponsored them, creating a layer of stability beneath the chaos of history. The second lesson champions the unsung hero of global understanding, the cultural translator. The Sogdian merchant, the Saharan guide, the Dvaravati monk, these were the essential lubricants in the machinery of exchange. They did not merely move goods, they moved meanings. By speaking multiple languages and navigating diverse customs, they prevented misunderstandings from escalating into conflict and allowed ideas to be adapted, not just imposed. In a world that often reduces interaction to a clash of monolithic blocks, these ancient intermediaries remind us that real connection happens in the nuanced space between cultures, fostered by those who choose to build bridges rather than walls. Yet these stories also carry a sobering warning written in the silent spread of disease. The same open pathways that carried silk and spices also carried the fleas that spread the plague. The ancient world achieved biological globalization centuries before political globalization, a stark demonstration that connection is a package deal. You cannot open a channel for only the good things you choose. Any network, then or now, will inevitably carry unintended consequences, both beneficial and devastating. This forces us to think critically about the systems we build today, to design not just for efficiency, but for robustness and ethical consideration. Ultimately, the most hopeful lesson is one of motivation. These vast webs were not spun by treaties or military conquest. They were built step by step, handshake by handshake, on a foundation of mutual benefit and voluntary cooperation. A Roman senator and a Chinese weaver were linked because each gained something they valued, not because their emperors were allies. This reveals a powerful, alternative engine of history, one driven by shared interest and curiosity rather than by force. In our modern era, often defined by stark geopolitical divisions, these ancient networks whisper a crucial reminder. Beyond the headlines of state conflict, there exists a deeper, older layer of human interaction, woven from commerce, curiosity, and the simple act of passing something valuable to a stranger. It is in these indirect, people-to-people connections that the true, enduring fabric of our world has always been made. From the Silk Road's dusty caravanserais to the Inca's mountain stairways, these ancient road networks were the silent architects of a connected world. They did not require grand meetings between emperors or signed treaties to reshape continents. Instead, they wove influence through the quiet, relentless movement of goods, ideas, and people across the spaces in between. A single trade route could alter the course of a religion, introduce a new word into a language, or change what an entire civilization ate for dinner. This was globalization in slow motion, a testament to the power of indirect connection. These hidden highways prove that our ancestors were linked in a profound, interdependent web long before they knew each other's names. They shaped the very foundations of our modern reality. The spices in your kitchen, the letters you are reading, the faiths practiced in your community, all of these bear the fingerprints of those long-distance relays. Even the challenging chapters of our shared past, the spread of illness across newly connected populations, underscore how deeply these networks intertwined human destinies. They laid the biological and cultural groundwork for the complex, intertwined planet we navigate today. So as we reflect on these corridors of the past, a final question lingers. What invisible networks are we building right now that future historians will one day marvel at? Our digital pathways and supply chains are the modern equivalents of those stone roads and monsoon sails, connecting us in ways just as profound and often just as unseen. The story of ancient connectivity reminds us that the most enduring legacies are often built not by conquest, but by the cumulative choices of traders, travelers, and translators, by the simple, courageous act of reaching out. If this journey through the hidden architecture of history resonated with you, subscribe for more explorations into the world's greatest mysteries. Let us know in the comments which ancient network intrigues you the most. Was it the relay runners of the Andes, the monsoon sailors of the Indian Ocean, or the fur traders on the frozen rivers of the north? Your curiosity is what keeps these old roads alive.